A stylish adult vampire movie, Chicago Sun-Times. Far and away the most artistic vampire shocker in 10 years, New York Times. The blurb on the back of the DVD cover has labeled it as an erotic and unusual movie that shocked both art house audiences and grindhouse crowds worldwide, which I'm assuming must have been back in 1971 when it was released. Others have labeled it the ice-cold terror of death. And what movie is this? The first movie ever to be reviewed for Good Old Lesbian Films? It is Daughters of Darkness. Or if you translate it directly from the French title, it's called Red Lips, which is very, very appropriate. In essence, this movie is a retro psychosexual vampire horror thriller with a lesbian element. Exactly how I like it. It's made in 1971. It is a Belgian-French-German co-production, which right off the bat you just know that this is going to be interesting. I chose this movie as the first movie to review because it was actually one of the main films that inspired my idea for Good Old Lesbian Films. It was exactly this type of film that made me wish there was somebody out there to review all these older retro movies that would have been so groundbreaking at the time, so risque, but also more or less playing on some or more of those good old lesbian tropes that would have perpetuated the idea of gay people or homosexuality as something warped and predatory. The first time I saw Daughters of Darkness, I was really amused and perplexed by it, and by the end, kind of enraged, and I will tell you why in a little bit. I know that I could not stop thinking about it, and I know that I've seen it more than once since the first time I watched it, and it has since grown on me so much so that I actually kind of adore it now. And the reason being that once I embraced it for what it is and put it in the context of 1971 when it was made, which yeah, at the time it would have been considered way out there, I realized it is pure perfection. A psychosexual, gay, campy, dark, erotic, troubling, B-grade masterpiece with a cast of 8 people, max, terrible acting, a brilliant, brilliant lead actress, oversaturation of symbolism throughout the film, some pretty stunning scenery and general shot compositions. For what it is, I do believe it is pure perfection. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a score of 73%, which is pretty good, and kinda just about where I'd place it, but it'll be interesting to see where it scores on the Lesbian Tropometer once I mark it against the top 20 lesbian film tropes. Just giving you a heads up right now, this review, like most of my future reviews I imagine, will be very spoilery, so consider yourself warned if you'd rather not know the ending or the details of the film. But since I'll be breaking down the elements from the actual plot line of the film, it would be very hard to do that without actually spoiling what happens, so yeah. Daughters of Darkness begins with a newlywed young couple, Stefan and Valerie, checking into a lavish hotel in Belgium for their honeymoon. Right around the time when there is talk of mysterious deaths occurring in the area, and coincidentally at the same time as when another pair of guests, another pair of mysterious guests, arrives to the same hotel also. One of them is a countess who is all gorgeous, flawless skin, flawless hair, very elegant, soft-spoken, says things like, "I'm just an outmoded character, you know, the beautiful stranger, slightly sad, slightly mysterious, that haunts one place after another." Which, oh my god, I die. She doesn't appear to age. And her name is Elizabeth Báthory, which, if you know history of vampire lore, that name raises some red flags right away. This does raise Stefan's suspicions, but not Valerie's, who is instantly fascinated by the Countess. The Countess's companion, Ilona, also beautiful, of course, but melancholy, is presented as her secretary and gal pal.
Ah, here we have our pretty Ilona. Mademoiselle Ilona Roxy, my secretary.
But you can guess almost right away that they are actually lovers. A bit of time passes, the young couple and the Countess meet and become friends, and everything seems to be going swimmingly well until Valerie and Stefan go out to a nearby town and happen to come across a murder scene of a young girl. That's when Stefan begins to show his true colors, showing a strange kind of fascination with the dead body, but also being a bit of a dick to Valerie by casually physically shoving her around. Valerie tries to brush it off, but once they return to the hotel and Stefan and the Countess bond over their mutual fascination of bloodletting and torture, Valerie freaks out.
Stop it!
Like, really freaks out.
Stop it!
But then she also kind of begins to misplace and misdirect all of her frustration at the Countess, blames her for everything all of a sudden, including Stefan's morbid fascinations and violent behavior towards her, choosing to believe that her husband's behavior is not really his own fault, which, Ilona's spirit likewise begins to unravel as the movie progresses, and we see that she's actually very fed up with her life as the Countess's secretary / gal pal.
I wish I could die.
On the one hand, laying her head down on the Countess's lap, saying things like, "I am leaving you," which is obviously a standard way of resigning a secretarial job and doesn't whatsoever mean that you are gal pals / lovers. While also doing super freaky things out of jealousy, like intimidating Valerie by unexpectedly jumping out on her balcony at night, entirely naked, and scaring the living daylights out of poor Val. Which, a little fun fact right here. At the time when this movie was released, this was considered one of, if not the, scariest moments of the film. Not the part later on when Stefan beats Valerie with his belt, no. It's the part when one naked woman with her arms raised like really awkwardly jumps out in front of the other and gives her a fright. That's considered the most frightening moment of the movie. And this scene actually is kind of one of the main things that the movie is known for. The first time I saw this scene, I giggled. I think this is actually when the movie started to win me over. No, I lie. I'm pretty sure it was when the Countess Bathory first appeared on screen. Let's be honest. But more about that later. Anyway, so Ilona is losing it a little bit. On the flip side, the Countess seems rather calm at the prospect of losing her secretary / gal pal. It could be that Ilona's negative attitude became too much of a buzzkill. Either way, they both seem to be a bit over it. And the Countess has in fact already scouted a new prospective secretary, companion, lady friend, gal pal to be, that would also coincidentally bust the blonde brunette trope, since both the Countess and Valerie are blonde. When on the morning after Stefan casually beats Valerie with his belt and Valerie attempts to flee him, the Countess intercepts her at the train station, kisses Valerie on the palm of her hand, and tells her that soon Valerie will love her the way she loves Valerie. To which Valerie, sensing lesbian vibes from the Countess, gives a standard reply of, "I despise you. You're disgusting." And though hurt by Valerie's acerbic words, the Countess is undeterred. And instead, she manages to convince Valerie to return to Stefan and see him for what he really is, instead of blaming the Countess merely existing for her husband behaving the way he's behaving and ruining the sanctity of their 72-hour marriage with casual violence.
We've only been married one day.
However, the Countess had also set things up in a way where Ilona was supposed to seduce Stefan, so that by the time Valerie returns to the hotel, she catches him cheating on her. What the Countess did not count on, however, is that Stefan would actually attempt to rape Ilona and try to force her to get into the shower. He gets really physical with her, and in his struggle to fight him, Ilona accidentally, conveniently gets impaled on his razor in the bathroom and then dies. The Countess is absolutely distraught at the death of her secretary. Not. So much so that literally a moment after seeing Ilona's naked dead body, She turns to Valerie and kisses her on the lips in a beautiful, soft kiss that almost makes it on screen. Unfortunately, the kiss is entirely blocked from view by a masterful shot composition that deliberately spells out heterosexual sex scenes, violence against women, exploitation of naked female bodies, and their death on screen is acceptable, but two women kissing is just too much. The kiss leaves a single speck of blood on Valerie's lips, in a way that is symbolic of events that are yet to come, but also to signal to the straight audience that this isn't just a lesbian exchange for the purpose of a lesbian exchange. This isn't just a kiss, two women kissing because they like each other or one of them likes the other. Clearly inappropriate and wholly unnecessary. This is a vampiric exchange. There was a single speck of blood, you see. The lesbianness of it all is just a by and by because female vampires are twisted anyway and they just do all kinds of crazy things, so it doesn't really count. When the trio dispose of Ilona's body, Countess Bathory wears a ceremonious, sparkly cape that makes her look like a fabulous Marlene Dietrich Dracula, which, when she spreads open her arms, we see the cape is actually shaped like bat wings, which I think is kinda meant to whack us, the audience, over the head with the bat shapeshifter Dracula Predator reference, just in case we did not get it by now. She is a vampire. After this, the Countess, Valerie, and Stefan return to the hotel. Valerie spends a night in the Countess's suite, just the two of them, which by the one very naked shot we were allowed to have of Valerie lying topless on a bed and the Countess leaning over her in an ambiguous way, maybe to kiss her neck, maybe to suck blood from it. It could be assumed that some sexy lesby times occurred, but the shot was vague enough to also accommodate for the lesbian vampire effect. Is it really lesbian if it is vampire? As in, was she really kissing her neck if she might have been drinking blood from it, Because, vampires need to eat too, so it's not really sex if it's food. Doesn't mean they were actually lesbianing together. This vague shot essentially justifies, kind of explains away the lesbianness of it all by giving an alternative purpose, because you can't just have lesbians in a movie for no reason, right? They have to be either vampires or predators, or you get what I mean. Either way, the next day, Valerie is suddenly all about the Countess, practically obsessed with her, but like super robotic about it, appearing not to be quite herself, because there is no way a sweet, virtuous girl like her could ever be into another woman, unless she was vampire glamoured into it. Again, lesbian, but with an alternative purpose. In any case, Stefan is pissed. Way more pissed about the prospect of his wife having lesbian sex than about him beating her mercilessly with his belt. To the point where he begins to spout glorious misogynistic things like, Valerie will do as I tell her, and I am a man and she is mine, which naturally means it's his time to go, right? So after he and Valerie have a physical struggle and he begins to beat her yet again, and the two women struggle to fight him off, which they attempt to choke and smother him by cupping his face with a glass cloche. Oh my god. But the cloche actually cracks in half, and somehow, miraculously, amazingly, conveniently, each of the halves of the cloche fall on each of Stefan's wrists. They cut his veins, and he oozes out ketchup. Or blood. Whatever. And being more than implied to be a creature of the night by now, and having converted Valerie in the same way through her sly, predatory, lesbian, vampire superpowers, both the Countess and Valerie begin to feed off of Stefan's ketchup, thus killing him. The two women then flee from the hotel in a car, drive all through the night, trying to get away as far as possible and hide away before the sun comes out. And I have to say, despite all the nudity in the film, and there is a lot of it, Despite all the nudity and all the sex scenes that occur throughout this movie, I thought this scene in the car, was kind of the most erotically charged and filled with innuendo, because even though they were fleeing for their lives, the Countess kept whispering from the backseat into Valerie's ear as Valerie was driving things like, "Faster, faster, my love, my only one. There is so much of life still to taste. So many nights tumbling and tumbling away." To which Valerie replies, "Oh, Elizabeth, you forever, your hand, your hand." And then proceeds to kind of make out with Elizabeth's hand while driving. Naturally, they crash, and the stunning, gorgeous, lesbian, vampire seductress Countess Elizabeth Bathory is violently flung through the windshield of the car, because you cannot have a female character who so unashamedly pursues another female character without somehow punishing her in the end. Oh, and when she's flung through the windshield, you'd think something like that would actually kill her, but no, she is impaled on the branch of a random tree, just to really do her in, you know? You gotta make sure that the lesbian is dead. The lesbian vampire is dead. But that's not all. To make sure she's dead, the car then explodes, she catches fire, and we watch her melt right there, impaled on that tree branch. So the first time I saw this movie, this is where I actually turned it off and stopped watching, because by now I was just fuming. I had then decided that I hated this movie because not only did they bait with the prospect of a relationship between the Countess and Valerie throughout the film, baited with the prospect of potentially a happy ending, even though the chances were still slim, but they also filled it with intimacy and sex scenes between Valerie and Stefan, a sex scene between Stefan and Ilona, and casual violence against women, which was considered acceptable to portray on screen. But the one and only kiss, the one peck between the two same-sex characters, was not. And then they essentially killed both of them off right after they consummated their relationship with verbal lesbian pseudo-car sex. So the first time I watched this movie, this is where I turned it off, decided that I hated it. However, the second time I watched it and got to this part, I realized that there was actually an additional scene, which I'd missed the first time round. Valerie is shown to be in fact still alive and now on the hunt for a secretary of her own. She is shown to be at a brand new hotel, chatting up some innocent young couple while wearing the Countess's old sparkly Dracula cape and speaking in Elizabeth's voice, assuring us that the spirit of the supernatural temptress still lives on, after all, through her. That's it. That's the plot of the movie. Cinematically speaking, I do have to say there is something very pleasing, dreamy, but kind of unnerving about the film. The setting is very genuine retro, naturally being set in early 70s, and stunning. The story being set in very large open spaces of a very extravagant hotel, while the cast consists of only 8 people. There's an overwhelming use of the color red as well that is very noticeable. It pops up vividly in makeup, red lipstick, nail polish, the costuming, red robes, red veils, dresses, or sometimes the screen is just straight up drenched in red as a transition in between scenes, which successfully, if maybe too successfully since it ain't subtle, plants the idea of blood and vampires, predators in the viewer's mind, even though blood is not actually shown until much later on in the film, and even though there are no obvious fanged vampires in the movie at all. As far as the overall production and the acting, the thing is, and I really have to say this, and I mean this with all due respect, I think by 1971 standards, the movie must have been considered a shocker and an incredible, thrilling cinematic experience. But by modern standards, there were some parts where I just giggled. I really did. And rolled my eyes. For example, the acting. Considering that the entire cast consists of 8 actors only in the entire 100-minute movie, it is definitely easy to spot the melodramatic overacting, the underacting. You can't miss it. Although on watching the movie the second time, I fully appreciate these things about it. Somehow it works, somehow it's grown on me. All the melodramatic screaming, the over-delivered or under-delivered lines, Ilona jumping out on the balcony in front of Valerie. I feel like the tack actually adds to the entire effect and charm of the film, including the campiness and all the obvious symbolism. And the moment the Countess Bathory appears on the screen, I was hooked. Not only because she's so beautiful and elegant and stylish, but because she has an element of truly mesmerizing, of subtly otherworldly, and is just absolutely sublime. The actress who plays her, DELPHINE SEYRIG, I think that's how you say her name, she's incredible. You can tell that she's a true actress, an actress to her core, the way somebody like Cate Blanchett is known to be. She brought so much life and vibrancy to the Countess's character. I feel like she is literally the glue of the entire story. And from the moment she first smiled, I could not get enough of her. Which, the more I thought about it afterwards, the more I realized just how brilliant and powerful her entire performance actually was. Even in a B-class movie like this. And I will tell you why. So, her character, Countess Elizabeth Bathory, is based on 3 pre-existing characters. First of all, there's the obvious one, Dracula, the blood drinking, the bat cape, the supernatural lack of aging, the power to mesmerize and influence a wife named Ilona. Sorry, I mean secretary. Even without fangs, it is obvious that she is a very, very fabulous, leaning towards androgynous, gay Count Dracula. Secondly, by her actual name, by her name alone, she's obviously based on the actual Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who was a real-life person and inspiration of many Gothic novels, who lived in the 16th century Hungary, supposedly tortured and murdered hundreds of young women in pursuit of their virgin blood to bathe in as a way of retaining her youthful appearance. And thirdly, she's based on the character Carmilla from the novella Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, one of the earliest novels written about a vampire and a lesbian, or at least queer female vampire at that. I've read the novella, and there were some striking similarities between the movie's characters and the book's characters. Carmilla is described as very beautiful, feminine, soft. She is described as very sweet, with a gentle disposition, having a beautiful smile and soothing voice, which has a mesmerizing, soothing effect on those around her, particularly the target of her affections, which in the book was Laura. In the movie, it is Valerie. Later on in each of the stories, both Laura and Valerie are shown to be influenced by the vampire, then unnerved by her presence, and eventually repulsed by her same-sex tendencies. And these are clear parallels between the Countess and Carmilla, and I do really think that in her personality, out of these 3 characters, Elizabeth is most like Carmilla. And I also really feel like the actress, DELPHINE SEYRIG, understood that. Because the moment she appears on the screen, not only is she hella stylish and elegant and just a gorgeous black hole that sucks in all of the attention, her presence is so soft and sweet. She's got the most beautiful, warm smile and sparkly, genuine eyes. Her voice is sublime. Everything about her is designed to be beautiful, soft, to draw you in, to hypnotize you with her beauty. The way she presents herself is in a noticeably vulnerable, unthreatening manner. You almost kind of want to feel sorry for her and protect her, but you know that she's holding all the cards and is in some way pulling all the strings behind the scenes to get what she wants. which in my opinion is really ingenious because usually these types of vampires are shown to be super seductive, saucy, curvy, writhing in their femininity, semi-nude, the polar opposite to what this particular character is. So in my crush on the actress who plays her, Delphine Seyrig, who I feel carried 90% of the movie on her back, I decided to look her up on Google, and it turns out she passed away 30 years ago. But in her lifetime, she was a total outspoken badass who stood up for women's rights and equality, and eventually became a prominent feminist figure as well as a celebrated actress. It also turns out she had a hand in rewriting some of the dialogue in Daughters of Darkness, particularly the exchanges between her characters and Valerie's, where the Countess speaks in ways that echo of a more feminist or even female-centric perspective to her, which in all honesty is the only real depth we get in the movie, making it kind of its saving grace. Otherwise, it might have been just a tad too superficial. So I attempted to find more information about her perspective on LGBT rights in real life. I got really curious about this actress because she's just awesome. But I wasn't very successful, although considering that she very convincingly played into the fullness of the Countess Bathory's character, which includes her sexuality, at a time when a movie like this would have been considered very much taboo, as well as having collaborated with other queer filmmakers on other film projects, and her own personal feminist activism, I'd like to think she would have been an ally. Either way, rest in peace and power to an amazing actress and women's rights activist, Delphine Seyrig. And just before I move on to the Tropometer, I do have to mention the downside of the film, the more sinister side. And no, I don't mean the murderous vampires. I am referring to a much more real, a much more disturbing element that I feel was not dealt with in the most appropriate way in the film and could be carrying real-life repercussions. Stefan is portrayed as being microaggressive and mean towards Valerie right from the beginning of the film, while she is portrayed as being tolerant and forgiving of his behavior. What troubles me here is a twofold thing. One, where the Countess herself actually at one point encourages Valerie to return to her husband and beg for his forgiveness, even though she hasn't done anything wrong and he is clearly a maniac. And the other side of it being that the narrative of the movie stubbornly dances around this violent behavior, kind of sweeps it under the carpet. Valerie is shown to stubbornly refuse to admit Stefan's responsibility for his violent behavior, shown to be too passive, too calm, and normal about it, as if husbands do casually push and shove their wives, and then persistently blamed the Countess's presence as the source of Stefan's violence, which is incredibly problematic in my opinion. I can't help but wonder whether this has to do with the time period in which the movie was produced, them barely having entered the 70s at the time of the production. I'm not implying that domestic violence was socially acceptable back then, but I do wonder whether it could be a reflection of a softer, more forgiving mentality on issues like domestic violence and general violence against women. Because even though Stefan was killed in the end and Valerie essentially ended up feeding off of her abuser, it was actually her misdirected conviction that he was not to blame for his own behavior that required closure in the film as much as Stefan's own behavior did.
What happened to us, Stefan? Why did she cross our path?
You'd speak differently if she were here.
And that we did not get in an entirely satisfying way. The closest we got to that was when towards the end Valerie refuses him sexually and tells him, "You cannot love, you only destroy." But the problem with that scene is that we cannot know for certain whether this sentiment truly came from her, from Valerie, whether this was genuine growth and understanding on her part, whether the Countess's influence had a positive effect on her, or whether she spoke in this way because she was under the Countess's supernatural influence, having been glamored by her. Gotta love the 70s. Now moving on to the Tropometer. Here I will compare the movie against the top 20 lesbian film tropes scoreboard, and for every trope present in the movie will lose 5 points, and for every subverted trope it will gain 5 points. If you'd like to see what exactly the top 20 lesbian tropes are, I will link below my previous video where I discuss that extensively. First one, queerbaiting. That's a bit of a hard one because even though there was a lot of teasing and will they, won't they going on between Valerie and Elizabeth, they did still have that one off-screen kiss and were implied to have spent a night together and then had innuendo car sex. And at least one of them made out with a female hand. I mean, that's pretty gay. However, when comparing that to the actual heterosexual sex scenes that were present in the movie, there is a clear, very clear distinction between the depiction of homosexual relationships and heterosexual relationships. And it is all very double-standardy and frustrating. Which, considering that the movie was produced in 1971, I guess is not so surprising. So I think I'm going to be a bit lenient and I'm going to give them an even pass on this one because they were saved by an almost kiss. Homoerotic subtext. Yes. So right away, just yes. This film is full of homoerotic subtext. The car ride at the end alone, its name should be Homoerotic Subtaxi or something. I mean, the hand kissing alone spells out both homo and erotic. But, I mean, there were other moments. The Countess dressing Valerie, scenes between the Countess and Ilona. Yeah, so I am going to deduct 5 points for this one. Queer coding. It's actually kind of funny because I did say that this film has a cast of 8 characters, right? And out of these 8, the Countess wasn't even the gayest character in the film. Believe it or not. It was actually Stefan's relative to whom he spoke over the phone pretending it was his mother. And that character is a very feminine man, very queer-coded, I felt. But also the Countess does appear quite androgynous and wears a sparkly Dracula cape. And I'm sorry, but that is so Rocky Horror Picture Show. I am so deducting 5 points. Don't get me wrong, she looked fabulous. She looked amazing in whatever she wore throughout the film. But it's still not a good thing to portray a queer or queer-coded character as a predator and a villain, which she clearly is. Although, she can turn me any day. Lipstick lesbian. Oh god. The lipstick. The lipstick on the lesbian. I mean on the Countess. I feel like her lips with that red lipstick on should have its own spin-off movie. Just saying. Okay, but I suppose I will take 5 points for this trope, though, because with 3 queer female characters in one film, and all of them were super feminine and attractive by straight standards, even though when the Countess does appear vaguely androgynous in moments, particularly when she's wearing the Dracula cape, she's still overwhelmingly feminine and has perfectly manicured nail polish and has perfectly done up makeup, things like that, which does make her very glam feminine in appearance. Biracial. I can genuinely say I don't think there was biracial in this film. If anything, it was very bi-full. In fact, when I think about it, all of the 3 female characters appear to be kind of sexually fluid. Even the Countess, even though her eye was mainly on Valerie, up until the end, she was still very inclusive of Stefan. And then Valerie, at the end, she isn't stripped of her own bisexuality when she goes to pick up that couple, where suddenly she's only into women, having been infected by the Countess's lesbianness, thus erasing her own very clear attraction to a man throughout the film. Nor has she abandoned her gay side either, which is kinda neat to see. She very much goes for both people in the end. So, I'm going to say that this trope has been officially subverted in Daughters of Darkness, and I'm going to give this movie 5 points. As far as straight washing, I wouldn't say there was any straight washing, but I mean, the trope wasn't subverted either, so I'm going to move on to the next one, which is Shameful Secret. And I'm going to say here that the Countess is very liberal with her attraction. I was going to say that the movie has subverted this trope, but then I remember that Valerie did call Elizabeth disgusting after she kisses her hand the first time.
I despise you. You're disgusting.
So no points for this. The word disgusting just hits too close to home. The lesbian affair. I'm going to say most definitely there was the trope of the lesbian affair, because Valerie's brief marriage is falling apart, but it is still very much a marriage when she becomes entangled with Elizabeth. Valerie does sort of find her courage and independence against Stefan through her affair with the Countess, but she was kind of glamoured into it, so I don't know if it counts. The film certainly does not utilize this trope in a positive manner, so I will deduct 5 points. Psycho lesbian. I mean, the Countess is definitely predatory, but I don't think she falls under the classic psycho lesbian trope. She's more of a lesbian predator than a psycho, I feel, but feel free to challenge me on this if you've seen the movie. Perhaps I am biased because I do love the character, but I'm going to pass on the psycho lesbian trope and will take away 5 points on the lesbian predator trope instead. The Countess is incredibly predatory, as virtually all vampires in movies are. Can't we have some healthy lesbian human vampire relationships in movies? Punish the lesbian. Oh boy, was the lesbian punished. Not just one, but 2 queer women were severely punished. Elizabeth and Ilona, and both with death. I should really take 10 points away for this trope, 5 for each dead queer woman, because no thank you. And please only ever bless my lesbians with eternal life and joy. Left for a man. Nobody was left for a man, although Valerie did leave her man for a vampire woman, so I guess trope subverted. Galpolitis. Have I mentioned the Countess's secretary, Ilona?
Ah, here we have our pretty Ilona, my secretary.
Pretty sure she died of having contracted Galpolitis. Poor thing. Stefan and all other characters, including the Countess herself, only ever referred to Ilona as her secretary, or at most as her friend, while in subtext she is clearly implied to be her lover. Come on. 5 points deducted. Lesbians only hold hands. Ha, yeah. I mean, look, the movie literally opens with a full-on, lengthy, naked sex scene between Stefan and Valerie, which is not the last time we see these two get it on, and we get to see the Countess's own lover, Ilona, also get it on with Stefan. But when it comes to the one and only lesbian kiss, a lip kiss, not even a pash, between the Countess and Valerie, it was actually off-screen. What the fudge? There is that one other scene where Valerie is shown to be topless, lying in bed, and the Countess kind of leans over her. Not even as a way of kissing her, but just kind of leans over her torso, implying to be sucking her blood. But that scene literally lasts for 2 seconds. I'm not kidding. 2 seconds, which, let me tell you, is just nothing. It's nothing compared to all the straight naked stuff that happens in the movie. So that is a hard yes on this trope. Not to mention the treatment of the first lesbian couple, the Countess and Ilona, even though they were implied only to be a couple. While Stefan and Valerie are literally out there making babies, the Countess spends her time knitting. I kid you not. She's sitting and knitting. She just spends a good amount of time sitting in an armchair, knitting, while Ilona comes to her and gives her longing, sad glances. Like, I wish they'd hold hands, in all honesty. That would be progress. So definitely taking 5 points away for this trope. Lesploitation. I can genuinely say there was no lesploitation in Daughters of Darkness, and considering how raunchy some of the other hetero sex scenes are, it's actually not a bad thing, because they easily could have just exploited the queer female sexuality all they wanted, if they wanted to, for pure shock value. But they didn't. A healthy, balanced medium is what we're after. And even though there was very little lesbian action in general in this movie, I do have to say that this trope at least was subverted, and I will give 5 points. Dead lesbian syndrome. Women behind bars. Obviously this movie was not set in the women's prison, but do women in hotel rooms count? Because there was plenty of that. School scandal, not applicable. Supernatural temptress. Oh boy, was there a supernatural temptress. And not only was there a supernatural temptress, there was the supernatural temptress. And she was magnificent.
Aren't you ready?
I really actually want to award the movie 5 points for this instead of deducting 5 points, just because the Countess Bathory was so amazing, but she was still a villain and her sexuality was still shown not in the best light exactly, considering she's a murderer and all. So I guess I still have to take away 5 points for this, although I do it with a heavy heart. Blonde brunette. It was kind of exciting to see a blonde seducing another blonde, because I'm so not used to this. This was definitely interesting to see, but I can't give points for this as a subverted trope because there was still more than one blonde brunette female pairing throughout the movie. And for the bonus trope, lesbian named Lena, there was no lesbian called Lena, unfortunately, which is a massively missed opportunity. And adding it all up, drumroll, this movie scores a negative of 35 points on the Lesbian Tropometer. Daughters of Darkness has 3 tropes subverted and at least 10 of the most notorious lesbian film tropes present in the plot, which, yikes. However, in saying that, we do have to look at the bigger picture and put the production of this film into historical context as well, which, as you know, 1971 Europe, it wasn't the most friendly of places for gay people. This being a Belgian-French-German co-production in 1971 when Daughters of Darkness was released, while homosexuality had been decriminalized in Belgium and France 2 centuries earlier. In Germany, homosexuality was illegal up until only 2 years prior to the film's release. So it's not that hard to imagine that there was still a lot of underlying social tension in relation to homosexuality and gay themes in general. Which I guess is why the scene where Ilona jumps out naked at Valerie on her balcony was considered shocking and frightening, and why the kiss and relationship between Valerie and the Countess was considered to be too risque to be shown explicitly in the film. I mean, I guess. Perhaps the director did the best he could, I don't know. But considering where the rest of Europe and the rest of the world was at in regards to homosexuality, I can't really say I'm all that surprised that there was such a big difference in portrayal of the gay versus straight relationships in the film, among some of the other harmful depictions, including the lesbian vampire effect, which is the justification of queer female sexuality being present in film. Also considering the lesbian subject itself kind of infused the overall tone of the movie, it was still a groundbreaking film for its time, especially considering that they did not resort to lesploitation, which was fairly common in B and C class movie depictions of lesbian characters. I am just gutted that the movie wasn't made today, or maybe 20 years from now, even better, because I feel like we would have received a much more expressive depiction of Valerie and the Countess's relationship, as well as the Countess's relationship with Ilona. On the other hand, we would not have had Delphine Seyrig play the Countess, Elizabeth Bathory, and she is worth it more than anything, so scrap the idea, I guess. Either way, it is an interesting movie to see. Once you get past the initial rage at how the female characters are treated, that is. But it is interesting to see how vampire stories were rendered back in the day, or some of the vampire stories. This one is quite unique compared to the rest of the genre. Overall, it is a classic for what it is, and it is good for a good giggle, if nothing else. I mean, the horrific violence aside. And I don't mean Ilona jumping on the balcony. Perhaps you should just watch it to make up your own mind. And so, this concludes my review for Daughters of Darkness. And my next review for Good Old Lesbian Films will be available on Patreon, so you can have a look there if you're interested. I also have more content available on Patreon as well, including extended reactions. And until next time, these are the Daughters of Darkness. They are waiting for you. They thrive on blood. I ripped that off the internet. I don't know who wrote that.